The Combat Patrol magazine is finally here in the United States. Finally, we can have a drip of plastic crack delivered straight into our veins. I'm super excited for this, mostly because it's like a taster of a ton of factions that I've never gotten to paint. In particular, I'm excited for the Xenos factions like Eldar and Votann, both of whom I've toyed with but haven't actually tried yet. But the time for the Xenos will come later. I want to give these Tyranids their fair shake, so they need a little bit more time in the oven before I'm ready to put them in front of a camera. That Terminator Captain, though, I've had a couple ideas for. If we're just meeting, welcome to Gone Hollow Minis. My name's Colt, and today we are tackling a Plague War-themed mini diorama base for this Terminator Captain. Now, chances are that you've seen a video I did a while back on the Silver Templars. They're a Primaris-only chapter of the Ultramarines, and I was originally drawn to them by their unique armor colors. But the Silver Templars have a bit of history with Hachette Partworks, the makers of this Combat Patrol magazine. They originally made it for Conquest in 8th edition, and then reappeared in the Imperium magazine for 9th edition, and are now back in Combat Patrol. So for this copy of the Space Marines Combat Patrol, I thought it would be cool to paint the minis as Silver Templars. But if you know me, you know that I like to go a little bit overboard with some of my character miniatures. Minis with these big 40 or 50mm bases offer such cool opportunities for storytelling. To not only set your mini into a scene, but to set them into their own narrative by giving them a foe to overcome. So let's do that with this captain. One of the most famous conflicts that the Silver Templars were involved with was the Plague Wars, between the Ultramarines and their successors and the Death Guard. I happen to have a couple Plague Marines still lying around, so why don't we use them to echo that little bit of chapter history into our miniature. Let's start with the base itself. This monopose Terminator Captain comes with quite the tactical rock already, but that's got a big old Screamer Killer head on it, so that's not really gonna work. Instead, I'm going to go for a Hive City Rebel vibe. To get this started, I'm going to take some cork bits and arrange them into a bit of a somewhat natural looking terrain feature. Once the pieces are glued down, I can go back over with the edge of an X-Acto knife and start shaving the edges down into a more natural contours. After this, I coat the whole thing in DOS clay. This is an easy to find air drying clay that works great for texture and sculpting. I just make sure to press it over my base, cork and all, pressing it into the contours we set with the cork chunks. This also gives us a good soft base to start working some of our rubble chunks into our ground texture. I forgot to record that part. Rookie mistake, I guess, but the process is pretty straightforward. To get the blasted concrete look, I just used some smaller chunks of cork. These are kind of off-cuttings from those two pieces I used to make the rest of the texture. I squished them into the DOS clay alongside some other plastic bits that I found in my bit spin. Tubes, metallic panels, stuff like that will all look great. But now onto our Plague Marine. My previous mini diorama bases have been somewhat tame in scope. A Night Lord lost his noggin, but that's about the most extreme. This time I want to go a bit bigger. I started by building a Plague Marine most of the way. Torso, arms, legs, head. But then out came the hobby saw. I made an oblique cut across his chest, basically from the top of one arm to the bottom of the other, and sawed straight through the poor ugly fella. Backpack and all. We'll keep working on this guy a little bit later though. I'm of course planning on a big Kurosawa-esque blood splatter, but most of the mini has to be done before we get to that. So first, let's get to that base. We've kinda got three main components here: mud, concrete, and the various metallic bits scattered throughout. Let's start with our base coats. For the concrete, I'm actually going to start with Vallejo Hull Red. This will get some dry brushing later to make it more concrete colored, but having a warmer base tone will help to make our concrete more interesting. For the mud, I'm going to start with a kind of mottled brown-green base. This is Army Painter Brigandine Brown and Vallejo Olive Green. I'm going to hit all of the exposed mud with these colors, bouncing back and forth, mixing the two together to make a more natural mottled look. Once the mud is base coated, I'm going to go back through with some ochre brown and Auraki sand, picking out the muddy texture with a bit of dry brushing. But now we can get back to the concrete. Over our red hull base tones, I'm going to dry brush over all of these chunks with some Army Painter Deep Gray, Vallejo Sky Gray, and finally Vallejo Ivory. As I get brighter, I focus more and more on the edges of each chunk, catching the highest points to really define the shapes. The ivory here, my last layer, is specifically chosen to make the last layer a little bit warmer than the rest. It'll work well with our warmer base tones we had, and keep the color more interesting than pure grays and whites would allow. One last thing of note here is that these little plastic pieces are really important to a Rebel base. They not only give you some texture variety, but also let you pick out some focal points with accent colors. I'm going to focus in on these tubes here, giving them each a bright yellow hazard stripe look. This will really catch the eye, but will also work well with the yellow tones on our Silver Templar Space Marine. Now on to our Terminator Captain. I have already done one video about the Silver Templars, but I've made a couple tweaks to the recipe since then, so I want to mention those here. Namely, these were in the yellow department. The previous yellow was okay, but it can be better. This time I want to make sure the pauldrons have a bit of a deeper color to them, especially in the shadows, and the secret to this is pink! Obviously, not yellow. And I still don't understand color theory. But anyway, from our black prime, we're going to base out pauldrons, tilt shields, and half of his helmet in Army Painter Blood Chalice. This is a nice pinkish red for us to work up from. For the next layers, I just add a bit of white to the Blood Chalice, dry brushing them on to get nice smooth transitions. As I get brighter, I focus more on the higher points of the pauldron, making sure that the tops are the brightest. After that, it's just a matter of slapping on some Imperial Fist contrast paint. This is a fantastic paint, especially for color schemes like this where yellow isn't a predominant color. It'll pull in the recesses, working with some of our warmer pinkish undertones to make for some really nice deep orange shadows. The rest of the silver armor follows pretty much the same pattern as my previous Silver Templars video. After a quick value sketch to highlight the details, I coat all of my armor panels with Vallejo Metal Color Steel. This is one of my favorite metallics and gives us a nice dark silver tone to work up from. After that, I thin down some Vallejo Black into a glaze and use this to shade all of my recesses. In addition to the cracks and crevices on the armor, I'm also applying this glaze towards the bottom of each armor panel, which will give us some really nice color depth to our otherwise kinda one-note armor color. After that, I can go back in and fix wherever my glaze got a little bit too heavy-handed by taking just the tiniest bit of Vallejo Metal Color Steel and feathering the more matte black areas into the rest of the metal color. After that, it's onto the highlights. We're starting with Vallejo Metal Color Silver, from the same range as our steel. I apply this in two different ways. The first is a traditional edge highlight, highlighting all the edges and corners of my miniature. But I also apply this closer to a regular layer as well, namely on the larger armor panels that would be caught by the sun. So mostly the shin plates, arms, and his big tortoise shell back. After that is Vallejo Metal Color Aluminum. I used to not use this color too much as I thought it would be a little bit too bright, but I think it adds a bit of extra contrast that makes the Silver Templar armor work really well. So I apply this as a final edge highlight to all of my highest edges and corners. Now, as with painting any Space Marine captain, most of the rest of this paint job was picking out all of the details, trophies, and participation awards that they like to bedeck themselves with. But there was one detail that I want to mention. There are a couple black details on this miniature as well, namely the bolter casing, his little arm tubes, and his cape. All of these can be done with the same colors, but we'll use some slightly different techniques. The bolter casing and tubes can be done with regular edge highlighting to really outline these shapes. But honestly, I hate painting capes. So for this bit, I'm just going to base coat it all black, then apply all of those same colors that the other black details got, but using a dry brush instead. You do have to be careful to not hit the rest of your armor, but honestly, I think it looks good this way. Will someone be able to tell that it's just dry brush if they look pretty close? Yeah, probably. But it passes the arm test for me, and it gave me more time to work on the more fun parts of painting this miniature, which I think is a win for me. Either way, after chasing down all of this Space Marine's tiny gubbins, it's time to move on to our poor unfortunate Plague Marine that was on the wrong end of this guy's power sword. Not to tease you guys again here, but honestly this is a bit of a work in progress recipe. I think I've almost got it figured out, but I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version here until I can give it its own video. From a dark brown base coat, we're going to be using sponges and ratty old brushes to stipple on our other colors. The end goal here is a dirty, corroded off-white, but we don't want to build things up too quickly or too starkly. After Vallejo Ochre, we're going to move up into Iraqi Sand. We want this to be thinned a bit so that it blends a bit together with our previous layers. To further help with this, don't rinse your brush out entirely when you're coming out of your ochre colors. The mixed paints will really add to the dingy vibe and build up the weathered feel to our layers naturally. The last layer is Brain Matter Beige. Not white because, well, white isn't actually white, but that's a topic for another day. Just like the other layers, feel free to mix and blend some tan and ochre tones into this as you're stippling. It'll only add to the growiness. Once our Plague Marine was finished up, we had one more major detail to finish up with, and that's the Akira Kurosawa-esque looking blood splatter. But this is a Plague Marine, not a Night Lord, so his blood and gore probably wouldn't look quite the same. But how do we differentiate that? Well, like the answer to any good Nurgle-related question, the answer is maggots. Green stuff ones, to be exact. I'm going to mix up a bit of the putty here and roll it into a snake. After that, I grab a comb. Just a regular one with fairly fine teeth, and roll little bits of my green stuff worm along the teeth. This will leave little ridges that look like little wormy segments. For the splatter itself, we'll be using a bit of UV resin and paper clips to make an armature. Just little curved segments will be fine. Once those are in place, we can start dripping our UV resin onto our wires, using a UV light to cure it into little dribbles and droplets. We can even cure it as we slowly squeeze it from the bottle, bridging the gaps between our armatures for some extra goopy, gory detail. Okay, necessary note here. You probably noticed that I wasn't using gloves while doing this, and that is a huge mistake and not a good example to set. If you try this for yourself, which I do still recommend, make sure to grab a box of rubber gloves before you do so. It's cheap, easy, and will prevent your skin from developing a sensitivity to resin. Trust me, I will be doing that the next time I do this as well. Sorry for the mistake, it was a safety hazard and it won't happen again, I promise. But anyway, with our resin globs in place, we can also start attaching our worms. I do this by just placing a little drop of resin onto the splatter effect, holding a worm, or part of a worm, into the resin and curing it in place. I'm sure you've noticed that these aren't primed, but they're such small details that I think will be fine. Once I've made sure that the splatter is totally cured, I hit it with an all-over coat of Murder Scene Speed Paint. This is a darker, more purple color than I usually use for these splatters, but I think it fits the Nurgle vibe. The worms get a coat of Army Painter agate skin and a layer of magenta wash to bring out the wormy ridges. And once all that is dry, I am left with this. I hope you all enjoyed this first miniature of the Combat Patrol magazine. Not all of these minis will be quite so in-depth, I just wanted to one-up this Blood Angel for quite some time now. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to keep up to date with all the Gone Hella minis has to offer, drop a comment to let me know what you thought of this or any of my other videos, and of course, until next time friends, be safe, be kind, and don't you dare go hollow.